really gotta suck to get your ass whipped by a guy who has a piece of hot dog stuck to his face. That's what happens in this week's episode of One Piece, as Vergo finally arrives on the island where Law and Rosinante are, and he literally beats the bejesus out of both of them. Matters are made worse when Doflamingo and his entire crew show up, trap the island into a giant bird cage of puppetry death. This week's episode of One Piece was a perfect example of just when you think it couldn't get worse, it just gets shittier. This week's episode was tension-filled to say the least, and the arrival of Vergo was honestly, I think, my favorite thing about this week's episode, because things just could not have gone more wrong. Because at the beginning of the episode, Law is forcefully fed the Op fruit. He's finally going to be able to use his surgical abilities to save himself, and obviously it almost seemed like he would have been able to master his abilities immediately and save Corazon, but apparently his devil fruit powers are really hard to use and it's going to take a little bit of practice. And Corazon has just been shot to all hell. He has been drive-byed. In an act of desperation, he gives Law this little secret message to deliver to the Marines, and of all the Marines to run into, he runs right into Vergo. And he decides that he's going to ask for Vergo's help because he wants to save Corazon. And when they finally meet each other, Corazon can't help himself. He actually starts to talk. And this is when Vergo just proceeds to beat the crap out of him. It all opens with this massive kick to the face, which honestly should have killed him. I mean, half of Vergo's foot was through his head. But it's all followed by him covering his body with his armored hockey and just wailing on both him and Law and leaving them in the snow covered in blood. It's a really chilling scene because there's like no music in this one panning view where you're looking down over them as it's snowing and there's blood and there's just silence. They almost seem dead, but really he's leaving them just a little bit alive because Doflamingo and his crew have just arrived on the island and they want to question them, and they make a little quick escape, and this is when Doflamingo activates his birdcage, trapping all of the other pirates and Marines on the island and is forcing them to kill each other with his strings of death. Their arrival was also really great, just how badass they all look when they're all standing next to each other. They're all a bunch of grotesque freaks, but I love those grotesque freaks. Speaking of grotesque, the episode actually ends with Corazon leaving us with a very uncomfortable looking smile, because he pretty much knows that he's screwed at this point, with the birdcage up, Doflamingo looking for him, and Vergo knowing that he can speak and probably has devil fruit powers. He's pretty much screwed at this point, but he decides if he's going to die, he's going to die with a smile on his face, and that's exactly how he wants Law to remember him. Dying smiling. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of One Piece? Vergo made this episode. At least he did for me. The arrival of Vergo was amazing because it was incredibly tense. You knew everything was just going to go wrong. It really was the cherry on top of the shit sundae for Law and Rosinante. They just got wailed on in this week's episode repeatedly, and it's such a shame because Law's right there. He has the devil fruit. He can heal both of them, but he just doesn't have the knowledge to do it yet. It really just aches at you. Doflamingo and their crew just showing up just made a shittier situation way more shittier. Just everything is going wrong right now, and if you look at the preview for the next episode, you just know things are gonna go south really fast. Otherwise, this is still a very nice episode at the beginning. It was very emotional when Law figured out that Corazon was shot multiple times. Dude should be dead, but apparently he is a little bit of a hard ass. Aside from the Vergo and Doflamingo stuff, Vice Admiral Suru also has a little cameo at the beginning of this week's episode. She's been mentioned multiple times in the series, so I'm sure fans of that character will be glad that she showed up. Otherwise, this episode really for me was just all about Vergo showing up and getting ready to set up the end of this whole backstory of Rosinante and Law. It looks like they're probably going to wrap up things next week, but I'm not going to hold my breath. One Piece really does like to take its time with things, and this week's episode was a little slow, but it was still incredibly entertaining, and if you're just watching the anime version, you gotta check out this episode. It's absolutely crucial. On the technical side of things, animation artwork looked pretty okay. Vergo going on the assault is awesome. I've always loved the look of his entire body being covered in hockey. Just it has kind of like this purplish sheen to it. It's always really shiny and badass, and it's just funny that they can make a character with that little octopus hot dog stuck on his face look so freaking awesome. But One Piece is one of those series that can make the weirdest things totally badass. So this was still a pretty nice episode to check out, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Just a fun, average episode of One Piece, but one that is mandatory viewing if you are just watching the anime version. But if you're reading the manga, check out this episode too. You might see something you like. So I liked this episode, but I want to hear from you guys. Did you watch this week's episode of One Piece? How do you think Law and Cora are going to get out of this sticky situation? What did you think of Vergo showing up? And what do you hope to see from the rest of the Dressrosa arc and the rest of the One Piece anime series? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.